It started without a plan. She was just supposed to help out at the gallery on weekends, filling in for the assistant who had moved across the country. The first time I met her, she wore a dark green hoodie and jeans with a rip at the knee. Her hair was tied up in a careless knot, and she had paint on the back of her hand. She smiled easily, but her eyes were sharp. I remember thinking she seemed too young for the role, and yet she moved through the space like she'd been there before. She didn't ask questions, just observed and acted. Quiet competence wrapped in casual charm. At first, I barely noticed her. She unpacked crates, arranged brochures, swept the floors. She played quiet music when she thought I wasn't listening. She cleaned the coffee maker, lined up mugs in neat rows, left sticky notes on my desk with reminders I hadn't asked for but needed. One afternoon, I found a ceramic cup next to my computer. Steam rose gently from it, the tea pale and delicate, just the way I liked it. I hadn't told her how. I didn't ask. She started staying a little later each day. I told myself it was because she was thorough or maybe just lonely. Sometimes she brought leftovers she'd made the night before. We sat on mismatched stools behind the counter and ate out of plastic containers, the hum of the street outside blending with the clink of forks. She talked more than I did, about her classes, about the strange roommate she'd had, about a book she was reading that had made her cry on the train. I listened, nodded, smiled when appropriate, but inside I was still somewhere else, still in that quiet, numb space I had been living in for longer than I cared to admit. One evening, I noticed the way the light hit her hair as she stood by the window. It caught something golden, softened her features, made her seem less like a girl and more like something present, real. I looked away quickly, unsure why my chest felt tight. She didn't notice, or pretended not to. Eventually, it became a habit. When the gallery closed, she'd stay behind. I would make tea, and she would rearrange the postcards or sort through exhibition flyers. We didn't always speak. Sometimes she just sat near the window and sketched. I could hear the soft scratch of her pencil on paper, feel the rhythm of her breathing in the same room. Her presence wasn't loud. It just filled the corners. It made the silence feel different. Not empty, not lonely, just shared. I began to wait for her visits without realizing it. I found myself pouring 2 cups of tea before she even arrived. I started noticing the scent she left behind, something faint and earthy, like rain on cement and lavender soap. I began looking forward to that quiet hour between closing the doors and switching off the lights, that space where time stretched and softened, and we became something other than boss and assistant. Once, she laughed too hard at something trivial, and I watched her throw her head back, eyes crinkling, cheeks flushed. It was such a simple moment, but something inside me stirred. Not in a way I could define, just a subtle shift, like a weight moving inside me. I pushed it down quickly, returned to my list of calls to return, emails to answer, forms to sign. But it kept happening. Small moments. Her hand brushing mine when passing a mug, her leaning over my shoulder to look at a painting catalog, her breath warm on my neck. The way her voice dipped lower when she was tired, slower, softer. I didn't react, at least not visibly, but I felt it. In the way my hands fumbled more, in the way I started fixing my hair before she arrived, in the way I began to notice my reflection in the glass doors just before I opened them in the morning. We never spoke about it. We didn't need to. There were no declarations, no confrontations, just tea, laughter, shared quiet, and the growing awareness of something stirring beneath the surface, still unnamed, still untouched, but undeniably there. The trip wasn't planned for us. It was a 2-night exhibition set up in a quiet town just far enough to require hotel rooms. I had done it before, stayed alone, worked late, ate dinner from takeout boxes, but this time she was the one available to help. Her name was on the logistics list before I had time to consider what that would mean. We left early in the morning, driving along winding roads as the sun climbed higher, the car filled with the soft hum of the radio and the rustle of her sleeves when she stretched. She talked more than I did, and I let her. Her voice filled the space between us like music I didn't know I missed. The hotel room was small, with 2 narrow beds and lamps that buzzed faintly when turned on. The walls were beige, the windows too clean. The carpet smelled like air freshener and old heat. She kicked off her shoes with ease and stretched out on one of the beds as if it were hers, her body folding into the cheap linens without ceremony. I unpacked slowly, placing my things with order, pretending not to notice how comfortable she looked in this temporary space. She watched me with a smile that hovered on the edge of something unsaid. That evening, after the crates were unloaded and the frames hung straight on the temporary gallery walls, we walked back in silence. My shoulders ached, and her laughter was lighter than mine as she peeled off her jacket and flopped down on her bed. I sat at the tiny desk, flipping through emails I wasn't reading. The air felt warm, too warm. She started talking about something, an article she'd read, maybe a memory, but her voice faded into background texture as I watched the way her fingers traced the folds in the blanket. She changed into shorts and a tank top, and I turned away politely as if that would make the moment neutral. But the image lingered anyway, the line of her back, the stretch of her arms as she pulled her hair into a messy knot. When I turned back, she was lying on her side, facing my bed, one knee bent, toes brushing the edge of the mattress. Her eyes were open but quiet, not searching, just resting. I slid under my own blanket and turned off the lamp between us. The room sank into that kind of dark that hums just below sleep. But I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to her breathing, steady and soft. The space between our beds felt impossibly wide and unbearably close at the same time. I shifted onto my side, facing her. I couldn't see her clearly, just the faintest silhouette in the dark. But I knew she was still awake. I could feel it, like a static current running under the floor. Somewhere in the night, I heard her shift. The sheets whispered. A soft sigh left her mouth, and I felt a slow throb in my chest, like a second heartbeat. I squeezed my eyes shut, not in fear, but in something closer to surrender. I didn't want to name it. I didn't want to examine what it meant. I only wanted to stay in this moment, to breathe in the warmth that radiated from her bed to mine. I slept eventually, though it was restless. Dreams came in flashes, her hand brushing mine, her hair falling over my chest, her breath close enough to feel. I woke before dawn, the sky still inked with darkness, and turned toward her again. She hadn't moved much. Her lips were parted slightly, her arm curled under the pillow, the curve of her hip rising beneath the blanket. Something in me ached, not with desire alone, but with something deeper, a knowing, a beginning I wasn't ready to stop. I stared at the ceiling until the light began to rise, afraid to sleep again, afraid to wake up different, but knowing I already had. It was the kind of night where the silence becomes its own presence, the kind where the hum of the air conditioner feels louder than thought, and the darkness presses close, not in fear, but in expectation. I had been drifting somewhere between sleep and waking, that delicate edge where time folds in on itself. My body was still, but my mind wouldn't settle. Her breathing was the only rhythm I could anchor to, slow, even, familiar. I had memorized the sound of her inhale, the quiet catch of air before each exhale, the way her body shifted when dreams pulled her deeper. I didn't know the exact moment she moved. It was subtle, like the settling of wind across still water. One moment I was alone in my bed, the next her warmth was beside me. The mattress shifted beneath her weight, and I felt her before I fully understood. Her hand found my waist beneath the blanket, hesitant, light as breath. My eyes opened, but the room was dark. I didn't speak. Neither did she. Words would have broken something sacred. Her body curved behind mine, the thin cotton of her shirt brushing against the bare skin at the small of my back. Her fingers hovered first, uncertain, grazing the hem of my sleep shirt. I didn't move. My breath hitched, caught between reflex and surrender. Slowly, deliberately, her hand slipped beneath the fabric, the heat of her palms spreading across my stomach. Every muscle in me tightened, not in resistance, but in anticipation. She wasn't rushed. Each movement was cautious, a question asked without sound. She traced small circles against my skin, exploring, learning the landscape she'd only looked at before. When her fingers dipped lower, just along the waistband of my shorts, my body responded before I could think. My hips shifted back into her, unspoken permission pulsing through me like a second heartbeat. Her breath deepened against the back of my neck. She moved closer, her thighs brushing mine, her arm tightening around my middle as if grounding herself. Then her hand slipped further, inside the fabric, onto skin that had longed for touch without knowing it. Her fingers moved slowly at first, almost reverently. I bit down on the inside of my cheek to keep quiet. The sensation was overwhelming, gentle and electric all at once. She explored with delicate precision, finding every place that made me tremble, every pulse point beneath the surface. I pressed my forehead into the pillow, the air catching in my throat. I could feel her, feel how attuned she was to my every shift, how she adjusted with care, with need, with intent. There was no hurry, no urgency, only depth, only presence. Then she moved again, her hand retreating, and for a split second, I thought it was over. But she shifted down the bed, her mouth replacing her fingers with a softness that unraveled me. Her lips brushed my lower stomach, then lower still, until her tongue met me with a warmth so deep I forgot how to breathe. My legs parted instinctively, and she settled between them, anchoring me with her hands on my thighs. Her mouth worked slowly, thoroughly, building pressure with each flick of her tongue, each pause, each press. I gripped the sheets, struggling to contain the sounds rising in my chest. The room felt endless, weightless, as if the world had tilted, and the only thing holding me steady was her mouth on me, her hands guiding me, her breath tethering me to this moment. My body arched, moved against her without thought, seeking more, needing more. She answered with rhythm and care, responding to every tremor with something deeper, firmer, wetter. The climax came like a wave I hadn't seen coming, a tightening that snapped loose, leaving me gasping into the silence, every nerve alive and singing. She didn't pull away right away. She held me in her mouth a moment longer, then kissed the inside of my thigh as if sealing something between us. I felt her crawl back up, her body sliding against mine, and when she curled herself around me again, I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Her arms wrapped around my waist, and I turned slightly, enough to feel her face bury into my shoulder. Her skin was warm, slightly damp, and her heartbeat pulsed against my spine. I rested my hand over hers, fingers tangling without a word. My chest was still rising and falling too quickly, but I felt her calm settle into me like a drug. We didn't speak. The room didn't change, but everything inside me had shifted. My body felt open, unraveled, rebuilt by her hands and her mouth, and the way she knew exactly when to pause and when to press. I lay there for what felt like hours, memorizing the weight of her against me, the way her breath touched my skin. I didn't know what morning would bring. I didn't know how to name what had just passed between us, but I knew I didn't want to forget it. I didn't want to turn away from it because something sacred had happened in the dark, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen. The morning arrived slowly, almost shyly, filtering through the slats of the blinds in thin ribbons of gold and shadow. I woke to stillness, the kind that makes you hesitate to move, as if even the smallest shift might undo something fragile. My body felt different, warmed from the inside, heavy in the most exquisite way, as though I had spent the entire night floating, and now gravity had gently reclaimed me. The sheets were tangled around my legs, clinging to the warmth left behind, and the faint scent of her skin lingered on the pillow beside mine. For a moment, I kept my eyes closed, letting the memory of the night before unfold in pieces. The way her breath had ghosted across my skin, the way her fingers had read my body like a map she already knew by heart, the way I had opened beneath her without fear, without question, as if my body had simply been waiting for her all along. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt too vivid, too visceral. My skin still remembered the path of her mouth, the pressure of her hands, the reverent weight of her body curled around mine. I reached out instinctively, fingers grazing the cool emptiness where she had been. My eyes fluttered open, and the room was awash in soft light. Her bed was empty. My heart fluttered with a quiet ache, not of regret, but of wondering where she was, what she was thinking, if she felt the same deep shift I did. I sat up slowly, pulling the sheet with me, pressing it to my chest as if it could contain the thrum of everything I didn't yet know how to name. The mirror across the room caught me in its frame. My hair was a mess, lips slightly swollen, a faint flush still coloring my cheeks. There was a mark near my collarbone, subtle but present, like a signature only I could read. I traced it lightly with my fingertips, not out of shame, but out of awe. My body didn't feel like a stranger's anymore. It felt lived in, awakened, answered. I stood, letting the sheet fall away as I reached for my robe. My legs felt shaky, but not weak, just tender from the night's unraveling. I moved quietly through the room, almost reverently, as if the walls themselves now carried the imprint of what had passed between us. Each breath I took felt deeper, fuller, as if space had opened inside me where something had been locked away for years. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard faint sounds from the kitchen, the clink of mugs, the low hum of the kettle, her soft footsteps across the floor. The smell of coffee drifted toward me, grounding and familiar, but now it carried something more, something intimate. I paused in the doorway, watching her from behind. She stood at the counter in one of my shirts, the hem brushing the tops of her thighs. Her hair was loosely pulled back, strands escaping to frame her face, and her movements were unhurried, fluid, like she belonged there. The simplicity of the scene struck me. No words, no explanations, just her moving through the morning with a quiet grace that made my throat tighten. She poured coffee into 2 mugs, pausing only to glance out the window as if the view beyond the glass could offer answers. I watched the curve of her neck, the rise and fall of her breath, the way her fingers wrapped around the ceramic. There was no tension in her shoulders, no trace of confusion or hesitation in the line of her back, only stillness, only presence. She turned and saw me. Our eyes met across the kitchen, and something passed between us that didn't need translating. Not guilt, not fear, just knowing. The kind that settles deep into the bones. She handed me a mug without a word, and our fingers brushed as I took it. The contact sent a soft ripple through me, not a jolt, not a spark, but something warmer, steadier, something real. We stood side by the window, sipping coffee in silence. The world outside had already started its day. Birds in the trees, cars in the distance, the faint rustle of wind in the leaves. But inside, time felt slower. The air between us had changed, not charged with tension, but thick with recognition. We didn't need to talk about what had happened. It lived in the way we stood, the way we moved around each other, the way I caught her glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. There was no awkwardness, only a softness I hadn't expected, a quiet certainty that something had shifted and there would be no going back. I didn't want to. I didn't miss the version of myself from before, the one who smiled politely, moved through routine, ignored the ache in her chest. That woman had dissolved somewhere between midnight and dawn, replaced by someone who had been touched, truly touched, for the first time in longer than she could admit. As the last sip of coffee warmed my throat, I looked at her again, not with questions, not with doubts, but with something closer to reverence. I had spent years building walls inside myself, learning how to live without needing too much. And now, in the quiet of this morning, in the aftermath of her mouth and her hands and her breath, I felt those walls crumbling without violence, only warmth, only light. We didn't speak, but everything between us was loud with meaning. The morning had become something sacred, not because of what had happened, but because of what it meant, that I had let someone in, that she had stayed, and that nothing in me wanted to pretend anymore. Not about what I needed, not about who I was, not about what I felt when she touched me. This was no longer a moment I could fold away and forget. It was the beginning of something, and I was finally ready to face it. Time moved differently after that night. It didn't speed up or slow down exactly. It just shifted, quietly, imperceptibly, like the tide turning without the splash. The hours that followed were filled with ordinary things, but nothing felt quite ordinary anymore. She stayed close, not in an obvious way, but in the small choices. Her body gravitated toward mine when we stood side by side. Her eyes lingered a little longer when we crossed paths in a hallway. The space between us, once casual and automatic, became intentional, measured, full. We returned home with the same suitcases, the same clothes, the same gallery catalogs tucked between folded sweaters. But something essential had been left behind in that hotel room, and something even more essential had followed us back. I unpacked slowly, her scent still clinging to the cotton of the shirt she'd worn. I didn't wash it. I folded it and set it on the dresser like a memory I wasn't ready to let go of. The days began to stretch in new ways. She would come over more often, not always with a reason. Sometimes she brought books, sometimes pastries wrapped in paper bags, sometimes nothing at all but herself. She would move through my kitchen with quiet confidence, her bare feet padding across the tile, her hair always slightly undone. I watched her more closely now. I paid attention to the curve of her spine when she bent to pick something up, the way her mouth tilted when she read something amusing, the small sigh she let out when she sank into the couch. There were touches, not constant, not overt, just enough to make the world tilt for a breath. Her hand on my back as she passed behind me, her fingers brushing mine when she handed me a mug. Once, she reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, and I felt that gesture for hours afterward, like a thread pulled through my chest. We didn't talk about it. We didn't try to explain. The silence between us was no longer empty. It had texture, weight, history. She started staying the night. The first time, it was late and raining, and it made sense. The second time, there wasn't even a question. We fell into bed like it was ours, like it had always been. Sometimes we touched, sometimes we didn't, but her presence next to me became something I needed, something I counted on. I would wake to the sound of her breathing and feel calm settle into my bones. I would turn toward her in the middle of the night and let my hand rest lightly on her waist, feeling the soft rise and fall beneath my palm. On some nights, she reached for me, slowly, with intention. Her hands would explore with a familiarity that never felt dull. Her mouth would find the places she'd already memorized, but each time felt new. My body opened to her again and again in ways that words could never match. There was no choreography, no rush, only a rhythm we learned together, skin to skin, breath to breath. And when I touched her in return, I did so with reverence. She melted into my hands, arched into my mouth, clutched at the sheets when I pushed her higher, and held her as she came undone. But it wasn't just the nights that changed. The days carried a quiet intimacy that ran deeper than anything physical. She would curl up next to me with her legs draped over mine while we watched old movies. She would write notes in the margins of books and leave them on my desk for me to find. She cooked with me, read with me, folded laundry with me, and somehow turned every mundane moment into something warm and golden. We never said what we were. We never gave it shape with language. But we existed inside it fully. I started waiting for her voice in the mornings, for the way she would stretch and mumble as she made her way to the kitchen. I started noticing how the silence felt when she wasn't there. Hollow, thinner, missing something. I found myself reaching for her even when she was across the room, not physically, but with my eyes, with the longing that had quietly taken root in my chest. Sometimes she would lie on my lap and close her eyes while I ran my fingers through her hair. We wouldn't speak. There was no need. The connection hummed quietly beneath our skin, a current that didn't demand expression. It simply was. And I let myself sink into it. I let myself stop asking what it meant or where it was going. I let go of the fear that had once clung to me so tightly. Because this, whatever it was, felt honest, felt needed, felt real. I had spent so many years living in a world of careful boundaries, of quiet compromise. But with her, everything softened. I felt myself returning to the version of me I hadn't seen in years, the one who could laugh without thinking, the one who could be touched without flinching, the one who wanted things and didn't feel ashamed for wanting them. We existed in that in-between space, before the questions, beyond the labels, and I stopped searching for answers. I began to live in the quiet, in the warmth, in the way her fingers found mine in the middle of the day without a word. I began to believe that not everything needed to be defined to be true, that some of the most real things are the ones we simply feel, deeply and without apology. And with her, I felt everything. There was no clear line that marked the change, no definitive before and after, just a slow unfolding, a quiet rearrangement of what once was into what now simply existed. We moved through the same spaces, touched the same surfaces, followed the same routines, but everything pulsed with new meaning. Her toothbrush beside mine, her coat on the hook near the door, her voice echoing in the kitchen while water boiled for tea. These small, ordinary things became sacred, not because they were grand, but because they were hers, because they were ours, because they had become the rhythm of something we no longer needed to explain. She spent more nights in my bed than not. There was no ritual to it, no conversation about whether she should stay. She just did. Sometimes we fell asleep wrapped around each other, limbs tangled, skin on skin, heat shared beneath the weight of blankets. Other nights, we lay apart but reached for one another in the dark, a hand finding a hip, fingers brushing a wrist, feet touching under the sheets. Her presence in my bed became an anchor. I would wake in the middle of the night, not because I needed anything, but just to feel her breathing, just to remember that she was there. Our mornings became slow, unhurried. She would pull one of my shirts over her bare body, sleeves hanging past her fingers, collar slipping off her shoulder. I watched her move through the house with a sense of wonder I never voiced. The way she poured coffee, the way she hummed softly while searching the fridge, the way she sometimes danced barefoot to a melody only she could hear. Everything about her felt like home. Not in the way I had once understood that word, but in a way that resonated deeper. It wasn't about comfort. It was about recognition. It was about belonging. I began to notice how easily my body responded to hers, not only in moments of intimacy, but in the quiet hours between. A glance across the room, a soft smile as she read on the couch, the sound of her laugh from another room. Desire didn't always arrive with urgency. Sometimes it came as a gentle ache, a warmth beneath the skin, a longing just to be near her, to touch her cheek as she turned toward me, to press my lips to her neck while she leaned over the sink, to slide my hands under her shirt in the soft light of afternoon, not to take, but to feel. We learned each other with unspoken fluency. She knew when I needed silence, when I needed her touch, when I needed to be reminded that I was wanted. I learned the way her breath hitched when I kissed the base of her throat, the way her thighs trembled when I whispered her name into her skin. We made love in quiet rooms and beneath open windows, in early mornings and late afternoons, with no fear of being seen, because what we had was no longer something hidden. It was simply a truth we inhabited. Our bodies met not out of curiosity anymore, but out of need, out of familiarity, out of something deeper than either of us had dared name aloud. I stopped checking the clock when she was around. Hours melted, folded into each other. Days marked by the way she fit against me, the way she looked at me when I spoke, the way she smiled when she thought I wasn't watching. Sometimes I would lie in bed after she'd fallen asleep, watching the rise and fall of her breath, the tiny movements her mouth made as she dreamed. I would touch her gently, not to wake her, but to remind myself that she was real, that this was real. People noticed, of course. Friends, neighbors, even passing acquaintances. They didn't ask directly, but the questions were there, in the way their eyes lingered, in the pause before they spoke, in the gentle tilt of their heads when we walked into a room together. I didn't care. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I had spent so many years living inside a version of myself that was curated and controlled. With her, I didn't feel the need to perform. I didn't feel the weight of pretending. I was myself, messy, quiet, tender, wanting, and it was enough. One afternoon, I caught her standing in the doorway of my bedroom, holding one of my books to her chest, her eyes soft and distant. I watched her for a long time before she noticed me. When she did, she didn't startle or smile. She simply walked over, placed the book on the nightstand, and climbed into bed beside me. Her head on my shoulder, her arm across my stomach, her body pressed close. We didn't speak. We just lay there, breathing in the same rhythm, and I felt something settle inside me, a certainty, a knowing. We never defined what we had. We never needed to. The world could have its words, its categories, its questions. What mattered was what lived in the quiet between us, what bloomed in the way we touched, the way we held eye contact a little too long, the way we always found our way back to each other at the end of the day. We were no longer what we had been, not just friends, not just something in between. We had become something new, something grown in the space where silence met trust. There were still moments of doubt, of fear. I would sometimes wake with a sudden jolt, wondering what I had done, what I had risked. But then I would see her bare back rising with each breath, her fingers curled loosely around mine, and the fear would dissolve, replaced by calm, by truth, by the understanding that I didn't need to be the woman I once was, that it was okay to be this woman now, changed, claimed, awake. And in her arms, in the hush of those long evenings, I finally let go of everything I thought I needed to be. I let myself live in the quiet certainty that whatever this was, it was real, and I wasn't afraid to be seen anymore, not by her, not by myself, not by the life we were building one unspoken promise at a time.